Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's movie is 1932's The Monster Walks, directed by Frank R. Strayer. In 1926, Roland West made one of the first of what was to come to be referred to as an old dark house movie called The Bat. It was a pretty simple plot and one that was spun off in about 4 or 5 different directions, but the most familiar is the reading of the will plot line, to wit. A rich old man or woman dies, and the relatives gather at his incredibly creepy mansion for the midnight reading of the will. During the night, the heirs, who invariably include a young, easily scared woman, her fearless, no-nonsense boyfriend with his black manservant slash chauffeur slash Man Friday, a wisecracking and or blustering detective investigating the murders, the creepy butler slash maid's son, and the usual assortment of lazy, worthless, backstabbing relatives who feel they should get the lion's share of whatever there is to get from the estate. Sometimes there's also a hot young black girl working in the kitchen for the manservant to play off of. The young, easily scared woman is usually the main target of whoever the killer is, and manages to narrowly escape being hurt, kidnapped, or otherwise killed. She's usually menaced while sleeping. She'll be laying peacefully in the bed, the panel of the wall behind her head will silently slide open, and a hairy hand will reach for her face before something happens to frighten it away. You know, one thing that always kind of bothered me about this particular scene was, why would a murderer grab someone they want to kill by the face? I mean, if I was going to kill someone like that, I'd just open the panel, lean out, stab the victim, and disappear back in behind the panel. You know, 1, 2, 3, no muss, no fuss, I'm gone. Of course, it goes without saying that since the intended victim is the young lady, she's not about to get killed, so I guess the point is moot. The Bat was a huge success, and like any other huge success, it was ripped off dozens, if not hundreds of times, with varying degrees of success. In 1932, James Whale directed The Old Dark House, where the plot line was people taking shelter in a creepy old mansion due to landslides caused by a rainstorm, and packed it with soon-to-be famous actors. Boris Karloff, Melvin Douglas, Charles Lawton, Ernest Thesiger, Raymond Massey, and Gloria Stewart as the easily scared young woman. Karloff played the scarred manservant, and his performance inspired God only knows how many creepy manservant characters, including the character of Lurch from the Addams Family, played by Ted Cassidy. The movie you're going to see tonight is an example of one of the Poverty Row entries into the genre, and it moves slower than a snail on flypaper. The one bright spot in it is Exodus, the black chauffeur of the hero, played by Willie Best. Before I go on, I'm going to give you a little history lesson here, and I'm only doing it because, you know, I hate to have to throw a disclaimer into this intro because I feel like it's going to sound like an excuse for what you're about to see, and I don't feel that's necessary. If you're a regular or semi-regular viewer, then you know how I feel about political correctness. If you don't know how I feel about political correctness, I'll be more than happy to fill in the uninitiated. I believe political correctness is idiotic. I am not a politician, and I absolutely refuse to constantly censor my method of communication simply to avoid possibly offending some idiot or group of idiots who refuse to act like adults. If you're easily offended, stay home. I don't suffer fools or whiny kids gladly, and the surest way to narrow my eyes is to start getting all PC on me. For instance, I often have to walk with a cane because of a minor birth defect. It prevents me from doing some things I'd like to be able to do. In short, it cripples me. I don't refer to myself as crippled, but I also don't refer to myself as other-abled. This is the hand I was dealt by God, and I have to play it. I know it could be a lot worse, and I'm glad it isn't, but I don't need some nitwit referring to me using a non-word like other-abled either. Let me state my point in one sentence. I don't particularly enjoy being offended, but I realize and accept that one of the prices we pay for freedom of speech is running the risk of being offended. The reason I said what preceded this is because the role of Exodus, the black manservant in this film, as I said before, is played by Willie Best. Something you have to keep in mind when you're watching old films is the era in which they were created. The fact is that society wasn't as enlightened in the 1930s as it is now, and stereotypes ran wild through the entertainment industry as well as every other facet of life. This was true of not only blacks, but Jews, Asians, Italians, and just about every other ethnic group as well, So I'll warn you now. If there's any chance that watching Willie Best perform in this movie is going to offend you, change the channel. Willie Best was born on May 27, 1913 in Sunflower, Mississippi. At the age of 14, he composed the popular standard, "I Love You for Sentimental Reasons," and later entered the movie business as a character actor. Like just about every black male performer, he was shunned into the janitor, servant, chauffeur roles that were heavily based on stereotypes. But what Best and others like Mantan Moreland, Eddie Rochester Anderson, and Stephen Fetchit did was push the roles beyond the stereotypes. Over time, they were able to make their roles less subservient and established a competitive, if not equal footing with their white co-stars. They fleshed out the characters they played as well as they could. In a 1932 interview, Best said, "I often think about these roles I have to play. Most of them are pretty broad. Sometimes I tell a director and he cuts out the real bad parts. But what's an actor going to do? Either you do it or get out." In keeping with the societal outlook of the time, he was tagged with the name Sleep and Eat by the studio publicity department. The studios pretty much owned the actors back then, and they all either towed the line or they didn't work. By the mid-1930s, however, he had gained enough of a following for his work to finally be credited under his real name. He appeared in 121 movies and TV shows over the course of his career, starting with 1930's Deep South. He appeared in supporting roles in movies with Bob Hope, the Marx Brothers, Laurel and Hardy, and Shirley Temple. He also performed as a singer and composer in several singing groups, being a member of the Brown Dots, who later changed their name to the Four Dots and then the Four Tunes. Today, Willie Best is looked on with contempt by most people, and that's not right. Something people should keep in mind is that if it weren't for performers like Willie Best, there would be no Sidney Poitier or Denzel Washington or Halle Berry today. Bob Hope called him one of the finest talents I've ever worked with, and he deserves the appreciation of modern audiences. Willie Best died of cancer on February 27, 1962 in Hollywood, California. Misha Auer was born Misha Unskowski on November 17, 1905 in St. Petersburg, Russia. His father, an officer in the Imperialist Navy, was killed during the Russo-Japanese War, and after the Bolshevik Revolution, he became what was referred to as a street Arab, living on the street with other orphans in unthinkable poverty. After reuniting with his mother, they moved to Turkey, where she worked as a nurse. She contracted typhoid from one of her patients and died. Misha was so poor that he had to dig his mother's grave himself. He began to wander Europe after that, eventually ending up in Italy, where he was found by his maternal grandfather, Leopold Auer, a concert violinist. Leopold brought Misha to America and encouraged the boy to become a musician, putting him through New York's Ethical Cultural School, where he learned to play several instruments, including the piano and violin. Bitten by the acting bug, he debuted on Broadway with a little help from his grandfather's contacts in a production of Ibsen's The Wild Duck, and from there continued his apprenticeship, performing as both a musician and actor. After seeing him perform on stage with the Bertha Kallick Company in Los Angeles, director Frank Tuttle cast Auer in his first film, 1928's Something Always Happens. Over the next decade, he found steady work appearing in supporting roles and walk-on parts, playing nefarious ethnic types, and found stardom when he was cast in the classic 1936 comedy My Man Godfrey as Carlo, the Leech pianist protege of Alice Brady. After this, he was pretty much typecast in the role of the Mad Russian and prospered, eventually appearing in 175 films over the course of a long and successful career. Of the role of Carlo, he once said, "That one role made a comedian out of me. I haven't been anything else since. It's paid off very well. Do you wonder that I am flattered when people say that I am mad?" One of his more famous quotes, which was used in many, many Warner Brothers cartoons, was, "Confidentially, she stinks," and was uttered in 1938's You Can't Take It With You, directed by Frank Capra. Misha Auer died of a heart attack on March 5, 1967 in Rome, Italy. The director, Frank R. Strayer, began directing movies starting in 1925 with An Enemy of Men and went on to a semi-prolific career directing movies and television. He made comedies, musicals, horror films, and just about any other genre you can think of. He's probably best remembered, if at all, for helming the Blondie series with Penny Singleton and Arthur Lake, based on the Chick Young comic strip of the same name, which unbelievably is still running today. To give you a little bit of history here, Blondie was created in 1930 and was originally a comic strip about Blondie Boopadoop, a gorgeous flapper with a ton of suitors, one of whom was bumbling playboy Dagwood Bumstead, the son of a billionaire railroad tycoon. Once the Depression hit, however, comic strips about billionaire playboys and their gold-digging flappers lost their popularity. So when Blondie and Dagwood got married, Dagwood's father disinherited him, and the two were forced to face the real world. They moved into a modest house in the suburbs. Dagwood got his job with a Dithers company, and they fretted over bills, fought, made up, had children, and as time moved on, became a two-income family, with Blondie starting a catering service. The strip is still incredibly popular, running in more than 2,000 newspapers in 47 countries. As old Dark House movies go, The Monster Walks isn't even close to one of the best. As I said before, it moves at a snail's pace, and like it or not, chimpanzees just aren't as scary as they once were, if they ever were. The interest it holds, if any, is as an example of the genre it represents. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy The Monster Walks, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.